Alright YouTube, I spoke about MGTOW in the past, but I decided to make a new video on it. MGTOW is bolstered by a small but very vocal group of social justice warriors who don't realize that they are the direct counterpart of third wave feminism. Now, this is partially a response to Varg's video on the subject. He points out quite optimistically that MGTOW ultimately weeds out the weaker males from the lineage by preventing them from replicating, preventing them from reproducing. The idea is that women have a higher capability to find a mate in general. They can be more choosy, and therefore there will be males that are left behind because of, you know, anything within their personality, their looks, whatever it happens to be. I share some of that optimism. It is a good point. It is right in some ways. But we have to remember that the very ideology is pushed in a manner consistent with propaganda at a somewhat organized level. And so therefore there may be people who themselves, they've simply gone through, you know, they went through a bad breakup or whatever and they get bitter. And then they find out about this MGTOW. Now there's nothing, let's say there's nothing wrong with them physically. Physically, they're just fine. They're not dumb. They're, you know, at least somewhat intelligent. They have a rational working mind, but they get swept up into this sort of ideology. Now, Varg, I would assume, would say, oh, well, then they've got weak willpower, and they're not thinking straight, so they should be weeded out, weeded out of the gene pool or something like that. They shouldn't be reproducing. Maybe. But all things considered, perhaps it's the result of a more standardized level of propaganda that's aimed at bitter men. The same way that third wave feminism operates, by the way. There are women who themselves, they're not, you know, physically unattractive. They're not mentally retarded. There's nothing specifically wrong with them, but they've been indoctrinated into third wave feminism at some academic level. Now, MGTOW has lately invented a new term called gynocentrism, the concept that the legal system or the reigning society in the Western world somehow is gynocentric. It centers on women and elevates them to a level above men. What I say to them is that the problem that you're witnessing isn't, oh, women are poison, I'm against them, or something, you know, some grumpy dwarf statement. What you're witnessing isn't, oh, women collectively decided they wanted to elevate themselves, and now most of them actively seek to misuse the legal system. What you're seeing is the same problem that I see within government and legal systems, which is simply overreach. Specifically, it has to do with alimony. Because men tend to choose career fields that earn more than women. This is where you get your mythical wage gap that, by the way, doesn't exist. There is no wage gap within different fields and positions. Men tend to choose fields that pay more, and therefore they tend to be the higher earner. So if the court is in partnership with the state, which it is, they generally are going to seek to give custody of any child or something to the female and force the man to pay, because they know that there's a higher chance that they then get more money out of it. But that's just government corruption. That has nothing to do with the decision that the woman made. In some cases, the case is solid. The woman has been abused, mentally, physically, sexually, whatever. The woman has been mistreated in some way by her spouse or significant other, as it may be. And so in that level of legalism, what's happened is that the courts are seeking to make money off of that. The courts seek to make money off of it. The state seeks to make money off of it. But groups of women, even the worst of the third wave feminists, didn't get together one day, overhaul the entire legal system to do this. This was just a natural progression within the judiciary. It's what happens. It's court overreach. It's legalistic overreach. It's the same reason that they still wage the drug war. Because private prisons can make a lot of money taking someone who has done fundamentally nothing wrong, enslaving them to hard labor for 5 to 10 years, and then putting them back out on the streets knowing full well there's a very high likelihood that they then go off to be an actual criminal because now they have fewer job prospects and fewer social entanglements. It's just the way that our legal system works. You're seeing a problem with the legal system. You're not seeing a problem with some vast conspiracy of females trying to rob you of your parental rights or your money or something like that. They're not the source of that. And MGTOW, additionally, I've already spoken about the behavioral sink aspect, so I'll leave that alone until the end here. Just, you know, say it again. It also has something in common with communism, and this is another reason why I feel very negatively towards the movement. MGTOW is unto communism as well as third wave feminism in the following sense. The communist says everyone should be the same. They should be homogenized. There should be no culture. There should be no differential religion. There should be no differences between people. Everyone should be exactly equal. You've got equality of outcome rather than equality of possibility. Instead of just giving people a fair shake and leaving it up to them to make their way in the world, communism always stresses, no, there should be no fair shake, there shouldn't be any shaking at all, everyone should just get the same lump of moldy bread, the same half rat-chewed pickle, and that's their daily victuals, and they live in equal hovels, and they have equal serf lands to farm for the state, essentially. That's what communism boils down to. It's a radically stupid, shitty ideology in every possible way. There's to the point where I had to write a booklet just on that topic because it's just so fucking bad. Third wave feminists, they do look at men, and this is, again, it's a small, very vocal minority of individuals. MGTOW acts like it's the majority of women in the Western world or some crazy shit like that. They look at males, and they see males as guilty, collectively, of the sins of a small number of men. MGTOW does the same. They look at females, and they extrapolate that the handful of women that are gold diggers, or are abusive, or are fucked up in some way, represent the majority of women. And I don't see it that way. Now, some MGTOW are a little bit more cerebral in their explanation. They say, yeah, I realize that there are good women in the world, but I don't want to take the risk of finding one that's going to go for alimony and just purposely screw me over, or something like that, or lock me into a loveless marriage by getting pregnant and then saying, oh, well, I've got a kid now. If you don't want to pay through the nose, you better do what I say, something like that. I would agree with that general tenet. Yeah, there are situations in which that happens. The answer to that is not saying, oh, well, I'm going to swear off, actual dating and just visit hookers or something like that. The proper explanation is use your friggin' head. Learn how to differentiate between individuals that are mentally stable and individuals that aren't, and your chances of that happening are considerably lower. And by the way, you can't shelter yourself all your life from all risk. It's an innate, natural human drive to have that romance and to replicate. So you don't have to actually have kids. There's such a thing as contraception. Unless the Ted Cruzes of the world take over. I'm not too worried about the Trumpites, let's face it. But it's an innate human urge to want that sort of companionship. Now you're saying, oh, well, yeah, I'll hire a prostitute when I feel lonely. Or I'll fuck around and be alpha and not actually have a relationship. That's not being alpha. That's something that any man can do. You can go hire a prostitute. It doesn't matter what you look like as long as you've got money in your wallet. So that's not a sign of being alpha. That's a sign of being avoidant. You're actually scared of the female sex, largely, to the point at which the only females you choose to have that interaction with are people that you're in some way temporarily controlling, in that sense, with money. It's also illegal in most of the world. I'm not sure if this has been fully thought through. The alt-right would call it a form of degeneracy, generally speaking, while at the same time admitting, it was certainly illegal overreach in the alimony department, alimony, palimony, whatever money you want to talk about. And then there is the behavioral sink that I spoke of. I see third wave feminism and MGTOW as ideologies that have largely spawned. They tend to be limited, it seems, in both cases to urban scenarios more than rural. I believe that it's the result of a behavioral sink. Now, Calhoun did this with his rat paradise experiment. The experiment was this. You have a population of rats and you give them unlimited food, and they replicate and replicate and replicate. And once their density hits critical mass, the males become weak and effeminate and only interested in grooming themselves. They become avoidant of social interaction. The females become more aggressive. They become selectively asexual, or they become absolutely rapacious. They'll actually rape the males. This is roughly what we see with third wave feminism and with MGTOW. You have males, they may make up whatever mental excuse they want to explain this, whatever cognitive dissonance they happen to adapt. They are essentially weak and effeminate males because they're not attempting to compete normally in a biological sense for female attention. Third wave feminists certainly do have a deep-seated aggression towards the male sex and towards other females that don't, join them. They tend to try to cast themselves as psychologically and physically dominant. You can even see it quite physically with some of these individuals. They take on a sort of masculine quasi-sexual role. It's a behavioral sink. And it's happening specifically in parts of the Western. It's also happening in Japan for the same reason. The reason why it's happening, and it can be altered in total due to culture. In Japan, you see less of certainly the sort of direct MGTOW or third wave feminist side because of cultural norms. But where those cultural norms are more loose, Europe, Western Europe especially, the United States, parts of Canada, it's limited primarily to areas of high population density. We're talking metropolitan populations. Now, my theory is that it has less to do with just the behavioral side, and it goes deeper into biochemistry. I believe it has something to do with sex pheromones. Literally, a male or female is being overloaded by their proximity to other individuals. They're being overloaded by sexual pheromones in their urban setting because they're constantly experiencing doses of, sort of ambient testosterone and estrogen and stuff and all these other things that are making their way into their brain. It suppresses their sexual drive. It's an evolutionary mechanism. And in that sense, there's nothing wrong with it, by the way, except for carrying it into perhaps a retarded ideology. On the biological side, there's nothing wrong with it. It's the body's way of telling you conditions are not suitable for breeding. There are too many of your species in this region. It's at critical mass. If you breed your offspring, you might as well just preserve yourself and hope for a population collapse, essentially. That's what the behavioral sink, in my opinion, represents. It's not just behavioral. And what it eventually leads to is the collapse of urban populations. Now, in our world, we've got migration of people within borders, we've got immigration, we've got things like that. It's not a long-term solution, by the way, to the behavioral sink. Actually, long-term, it makes it worse. We're propping up populations that should subside over time. The goal of Western Europe and urban parts of the U.S. should be to oversee the slow reduction of population density within some of these larger metropolitan regions. Not to bring in foreigners to prop up a growing population that's already hit that critical mass. You're going to make the behavioral sink worse, and it'll be worse for you in the long run. Trust me, in the 10, 20, 30 years down the road, you're going to begin to see even more symptoms. Half a century from now, I wouldn't be surprised if these urban populations collapse outright and there's no way to replace them. But that's essentially, in my opinion, what MGTOW and third wave feminism represent. Varg can say, well, I'm optimistic because they're all beta males. No, I see it as people who have become beta because they're being flooded with pheromones within urban settings. Now, of course, Thulean perspective there probably doesn't care about the urbanites so much because their way of life was already not sustainable. These are people who, in some cases, they think vegetables grow on the store shelf. They don't know how to grow anything. They don't know how to process anything. They do clerical work or whatever. And it's all reliant upon modern fixtures. It's reliant upon electricity and so forth, or oil extraction. That's true. No argument there. That's something that doesn't even require a behavioral sink, though, to be true. As far as the ideology itself goes, though, it's not really that different from third wave feminism. It makes the same sweeping statements. It misattributes the same problems. Third wave feminists think that males are part of some patriarchal conspiracy to suppress them. And that's not actually true. What you're seeing is that the legal system, historically for some time, was chauvinistic, and it was. Even after women gained the right to vote, there still is the property and all of these other things. For a while, it was legal to rape your wife and so forth. Yeah, that's definitely true, but the average male didn't participate in that. It's like slavery. People at BLM, they say, oh, whites need to pay reparations or something. The average white never owned slaves, even in slave-holding territories. Up here, there never was slavery. So they're trying to homogenize what they see as their opponent, but their opponent invariably is corruption at the state or judiciary level. That's the case whether you're talking about MGTOW, third wave feminism, some anti-war movement, whether you're talking about slavery, segregation. It all comes from a state. It comes from an organized central group that then suppresses people. It doesn't come from the average citizen. They had little to no involvement, generally speaking, outside of, you know, the Ku Klux Klan or something like that. Outside of that, the other citizens never really weighed in. They had no part in the process. So I oppose MGTOW. I think it's dumb. If you want to be MGTOW, I'm not going to try to stand in your way. I just think that perhaps you should think more deeply about what you've gotten yourself involved in, and see that really your beef isn't with all females. Your beef is with a slim minority of females that have caused you to avoid all others, number one, as well as the judiciary of the United States, if you're here in the U.S. or in Europe, as it may be the case. Third-wave feminists, same thing applies. Your beef isn't with, you think that all men are evil, all men are patriarchal and out to get you or something. They're not. Most of them are totally ambivalent. They oppose third-wave feminism. They don't oppose equality for women. Even MGTOW itself, one of the motivators there is the reform of that judiciary. Insofar as they're involved with that, I have no problem with the ideology. That's not only is it not problematic, I would support that. Yeah, we need to rein in the judicial system in the Western world. The way to do that is probably not saying women are poison, I refuse to date normally and reproduce and stuff. That's a little more fringe than just saying, oh, well, the court system's screwed up. We need to do something about this. Well, no shit. That's something that even a lot of leftists believe in. They just disagree on how exactly to reform it. That's about all. Peace out.